Brian Jones was kicked out of the Rolling Stones, the band he started, in 1969. Years later, Mick Jagger was asked if he regretted how he treated Jones. His answer was seriously twisted. Brian Jones was the multi-talented, flamboyantly dressed, creative inspiration for the Rolling Stones. In fact, some people believe that if there had been no Brian Jones, there would have been no Rolling Stones at all. And yet the other band members ended up getting together and ousting him from the fabled rock band. Just 1 month later, Jones' lifeless body was found at the bottom of his swimming pool. It may have been a result of rock star excess, but some believe that something much more sinister may have happened. Born in 1942 in Cheltenham, Jones detested the conformity of school life and often showed open hostility toward his teachers. This behaviour left the school no choice but to give him the boot, twice. Thankfully, there was something else in his life that made him much happier. Jones was a music lover from early on, and soon he was playing gigs in clubs around the city. He was also doing something else many musicians do, getting into trouble with women. When he was still a teenager, Jones accidentally got a girlfriend pregnant. She carried the baby to term, and then the young couple made the decision to give it up for adoption. Most people would learn a valuable lesson from this experience, but not Jones. About a year later, he found himself in the exact same situation. Another unwanted pregnancy, another adoption. He left the drama behind him and went on a trip abroad. He lived a bohemian lifestyle, but it soon became clear that busking and borrowing weren't enough for him to get by. Shortly after returning to the UK, Jones had a one-night stand with a married woman and was soon in the same predicament as before. This time Jones had no idea about the child, which this woman and her husband secretly decided to raise as their own. Jones was just turning 20 and he'd already had 3 kids with 3 different women. He knew he had to get a grip on his life, so he applied for and won an art scholarship. Before he could take advantage of this windfall, an unnamed acquaintance sent a scathing letter outlining to the college exactly why Jones was not a worthy recipient of the money. Dejected, Jones was back to square one and back to his reckless ways with women. When Jones' next girlfriend Pat Andrews got pregnant, he was intent on doing things right. The child was Julian Mark Andrews, and Jones decided to move in with the mother and child. He got a job and even sold his vast collection of records to buy clothes for the baby. Despite being a new dad, Jones made a move to London to become involved in the jazz and blues scene. After failed attempts with some London bands, in May of 1962, he decided to place an ad to start his own. Through the ad, he met Ian Stewart. Then, Mick Jagger and his childhood friend Keith Richards also signed on. Jones was soon busy trying to line up a gig for his newly formed band. While on the phone with a club owner, he realised the band needed a name. Frantically looking around his apartment, his eyes fell on an album cover. On it there was a song by Muddy Waters called Rolling Stone Blues. On July 12, 1962, the Rolling Stones, consisting of Jones, Jagger, Richards and a bass player and drummer, played their first gig at the Marquee Club. It was the beginning of one of the most iconic rock bands of all time. Then some toxic dynamics immediately began to emerge. Once the Rolling Stones added Bill Wyman on bass and Charlie Watts on drums, Jones did something odd. He decided that he was the boss. He thought his services as gig finder were worth a few dollars more than the other guys made, and this caused some major resentment in the band. All the guys in the Rolling Stones, except Jones, wanted a real manager, so they found one in the form of teenager Andrew Loog Oldham. His idea was to present the band as the anti-Beatles, which meant they were a rougher bunch than the Liverpool foursome. This was bad news for Jones, as Oldham didn't think the band's image could tolerate a member being a father. For the sake of the band, Oldham made a disturbing demand. He forbade Jones from letting the press and fans see him with either his girlfriend or their child. Jones agreed and assured his family that it was temporary and good for his career. It seemed that Jones was incapable of being a one-woman man. Well, he was about to meet his match. In 1965, the Rolling Stones were on tour in Munich, and they ran into model Anita Pallenberg. Jones and Pallenberg were soon seeing each other, and this relationship had a huge effect on him as an artist. With Pallenberg's encouragement, Jones started being more experimental. Pallenberg was shaking up the Rolling Stones, and she was about to be at the centre of a huge conflict. In 1967, Jones, Pallenberg and Richards went travelling together. Jones fell ill in Toulouse and had to go to the hospital, which meant that Pallenberg and Richards would be on their own. While touring Europe, Pallenberg and Richards were getting close, a little too close. Eventually, Jones recovered and caught up with them in Morocco. When he noticed the chemistry between Pallenberg and Richards and put two and two together, his anger took over. He struck Pallenberg across the face, and in doing so, broke his own hand. In the end, Pallenberg returned to England with Richards, and the two moved in together. Of course, this infuriated Jones, and just added to the problems he was facing with the Rolling Stones. In addition to his romantic woes, Jones had other problems. He'd started using illicit substances, and this meant he missed rehearsals and wasn't really acting like a full band member. In fact, he sometimes refused to even play the guitar, and instead insisted on playing more exotic instruments. The Rolling Stones were becoming a phenomenon, and Jones just wasn't taking it seriously. In May of 1967, authorities charged Jones for possession of illicit substances, and the case went to court. Then, in the middle of the trial, his mental health took a turn for the worse. At the same time, Jones was seeing a psychiatrist named Dr. Leonard Henry, and he worried that Jones was on the verge of a breakdown. Ultimately, the judge showed pity on him and only required him to continue treatment under the care of his psychiatrist. The judge had shown compassion, but his bandmates weren't going to be that kind. The members of the Rolling Stones were not happy with Jones at all. They said that he had two sides to his personality. At times he was amicable and even kind, but at other times he was mean-spirited and hard to work with. They also found him needy. The guys were afraid to fire him, so they did something completely heartless. They began to phase Brian Jones out as a member of the band. First up was in relation to recording. At one time, Jones would have been playing a dizzying variety of instruments on numerous tracks. Under the new regime, Jones just had small parts on a few tracks. Then the Stones planned to curtail Jones' contribution when it came to performance. In 1968, the Rolling Stones began a project called The Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. This was a concert film and also featured other performers like The Who. After watching the Stones dealing with Jones, Roger Daltrey and Pete Townshend of The Who both thought that his days with the band were numbered. The truth was, it already seemed that Jones also wanted to part ways with the Rolling Stones. The night before they were to film Rock and Roll Circus, Jones called the director and said he didn't want to participate. But he didn't stop there. He went on to say that he hated the Rolling Stones. The startled director managed to talk some sense into him, and Jones came to the set, but it was going to be a very difficult day. Jethro Tull member Ian Anderson said that Jones was in such bad shape that he couldn't even tune his own guitar. But Anderson also said that the Rolling Stones as a group were insufficiently rehearsed. The shoot went so badly that Jagger wouldn't let the public see the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus for almost 30 years. There was no rest for Jones, and next the authorities once again caught him in possession of drugs. Since he was on probation, there was the potential for this to be a very big deal. His flimsy excuse was that they belonged to the previous tenants of the apartment, but the judge wasn't buying it. He started talking about putting Jones behind bars. For Jones' trial for possession, there was both a judge and jury. The jury wasted no time in proclaiming him guilty, but the judge paused. He seemed to feel sorry for Jones and didn't want to see him in prison. Instead, Jones got a light fine and told to stay out of trouble. Luck was once again on his side, but Jones would pay for this misdeed in another way. This latest run-in with the law made the Rolling Stones even more enraged. They were now preparing for a tour of the United States and getting very nervous. Because of Jones' legal issues, it would be almost impossible for him to get a visa to go on the tour. As the Rolling Stones were gearing up for the tour, Jones was consistently missing rehearsals. What's worse was that when he did show up, he wasn't really an active participant. On the rare occasion when he did flex his musical muscles, it was often so bad that the other band members had to unplug his amp. Jones was clearly suffering at rehearsals, and unfortunately his day-to-day life was no better. One day Jones went on a motorcycle ride and somehow ended up driving straight into a shop window. He was raced to hospital, and there the authorities took pity on him. They allowed him to check in under an assumed name to avoid bad publicity. He avoided some negative news coverage, but he still had the wrath of the band to face. As the tour date got closer, it became clear that Jones would not be eligible for a US work permit. This was exactly what the guys needed. On June 8th, 1969, the members of the band told him that he would not be continuing with the Rolling Stones, the band he'd started. To save face, Jones announced that he was leaving the band because they couldn't agree on the kind of music they were making. Now it was finally time for Jones to show the world what he could do on his own. Sadly, he didn't have much time to do it. Brian Jones was now free of the band he hated, so he bought an estate and started trying to assemble a new band. On July 2nd, Jones was spending the evening with his girlfriend Anna Wolin, a female friend named Janet Lawson, and Frank Thorogood, who was doing a construction job on Jones' new house. Jones and Thorogood were drinking and Jones was taking pills. When the idea for a late-night swim came up, Lawson, who was a nurse, told the men they were in no condition for a safe swim. Later that night, a housekeeper entered the pool area and came upon a shocking scene. Jones was lying at the bottom of the pool and he wasn't moving. Anna Wolin jumped into the pool and dragged her boyfriend to safety. Once the paramedics took over from Wolin, they became certain that Jones was long gone. A detective arrived and found multiple empty bottles of booze. In addition to the bottles, he also found containers of pills. It seemed pretty clear what had caused Jones to drown in his pool. But later, evidence emerged suggesting that something else may have been the cause. Another theory about Jones' death didn't involve drug use or drinking. As it turned out, the night of the party was a heavy pollen count day. Because Jones suffered from asthma, it could be that the pollen in the air had a strong adverse effect on Jones, causing him to drown. A third theory goes into much darker territory. One of the last people to see Jones alive was Frank Thorogood, who'd been hiding a dark secret. Apparently Jones and Thorogood had an argument over how much money Jones owed him for his work on the house. Thorogood was keeping his mouth shut about what happened that night, but years later he came out with a startling admission. In 1993, as Thorogood lay dying in the hospital, he was visited by the Rolling Stones driver and fixer Tom Keylock. Thorogood's life was quickly coming to an end, and he wanted to get something off his chest. He told Keylock that he'd done Brian. A shocked Keylock told Thorogood that he'd return the next day to hear the rest of the story. When he returned, Thorogood had died. The truth of that night is now buried 6 feet under with Thorogood, but there's still one more mystery. When Brian Jones died, his age seemed to have no significance. When 4 more music stars, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Alan Wilson and The Doors' Jim Morrison, all died at the same age, it was starting to feel a little creepy. Jones was the first member of the 27 Club, and sadly new members like Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse continue to follow in his tragic and mysterious footsteps. Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman were the only Rolling Stones members to attend Jones' funeral. Richards was nowhere to be found, and Jagger claimed that the contract for the movie he was working on prevented him from attending. Years later, Jagger was asked if he felt guilty about Jones' death. He said, "I do feel that I behaved in a very childish way, but we were very young, and in some ways, we picked on him. But unfortunately, he made himself a target for it. He was very, very jealous, very difficult, very manipulative. And if you do that in this kind of group, you get back as good as you give." If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos.